Sexual abuse and misconduct within the Christian church has been ongoing for many, many years. Now, why is it happening and what is the solution to the problem? Joining me now to discuss this is Reverend Tim Callaway, pastor of Daybreak Community Church in Airdrie, Alberta, and co-chair of Missionary Kids Safety Net. Pastor Tim, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much, Hal. I appreciate the invite.
Now, we've all read the stories of clergy members sexually abusing parishioners. There's also a lot of sexual misconduct. Is this a problem we see more in the Western world, or is it a problem around the world?
Unfortunately, it is a global problem. And the reason I say that is I have files today that are open files relating to cases in the Philippines, South America, Australia, the UK. Of course, because we're in North America, often we hear more about the North American cases, and we have a natural interest in that. But unfortunately, it is a global problem. For example, the organization that I represent, Missionary Kids Safety Net, was born out of sexual abuse taking place in missionary schools for kids in various parts of the world, including Africa. And so, unfortunately, it is indeed a global problem.
Now, often the focus is on Catholic priests, but you're quick to point out that sexual abuse and misconduct by clergy is not just a Catholic problem. You say it's equally as rampant in the Protestant and evangelical world?
I'll tell you why I say that, Hal. So I'm going to date myself here, but way back in 1984, when I was in my last year of seminary, I desperately needed a thesis topic. And it had to be related to a course that I was taking, and I was taking my last course, which happened to be in family counseling. And one day I'm just reading the Chicago Tribune. I was going to school in Chicago, and an article there involving a local situation where I believe the father was charged with molesting his own daughters, and it was mentioned that he was active in the local church. And the reporter made the observation saying, people in the know say that statistics of sexual abuse are as great as, if not greater than, in the religious world than in mainstream society. Now, Hal, in my naivety at the time, my first reaction was, I don't believe that. There's the media just trying to screw the church again. Then the more I thought about it, I thought, well, maybe this is my thesis topic. I can do a survey and prove this assertion wrong. And so I went ahead and compiled a survey that met all of the clinical standards for accuracy and that sort of thing. And as I watched those survey results come in, I realized we have a problem which no one knows what to do with, and nobody knows how to go about properly addressing it. Now, again, that was in 1984. Remember, that was before internet. That was before much of the news had come out about the Catholic priests situation. And so this question, this problem of sexual abuse, really wasn't even on the horizon of the religious world, let alone mainstream society. And so in my own experience, I can go back all the way to seminary days, 1984, when I first became aware of this problem that is in the evangelical church and in the Protestant world. And since then, of course, we've discovered that it's equally happening in not just the Catholic world, but the Protestant world as well.
I guess the most common question asked is, why do clergy members commit sexual abuse and misconduct, considering these are people who are supposed to be God's representatives here on earth?
You know, that's a very good question. And as I've thought about that, naturally it goes without saying, we're all human. We're all sinners. We're all susceptible to the inevitable temptations of life. But beyond that, those who have served in Christian ministry know that there are some unique challenges, some unique potential foibles that come to a pastor. One thing that you have to wrestle with often is a sense of powerlessness. Sometimes you're up against the church board, there's politics going on in the church world, and so you're feeling very, you're given a lot of responsibility, but really not much authority, and so there's an element of powerlessness that can come into play here. Of course, you're also dealing with people with the very intimate and personal details of life. And so, especially, for example, in marriage counseling and that sort of thing, very often sexual relationships, that type of thing comes up. And so when you're talking about that with especially members of the opposite sex, sometimes that's how it can happen. And so there is a unique aspect to being a pastor.
Now, the reality is this problem is not likely to go away anytime soon. But I think public sentiment is that there should be far more serious consequences for clergy members found guilty of these crimes. What are your thoughts?
I agree with that. One of the, and as we all know, it's not sexual abuse, sexual misconduct is not unique to the church world, the religious world, or to pastors, coaches, teachers. We hear stories like that as well. The unique thing about it happening in the church world or being perpetrated by pastors is that very often the pastor represents, for better or worse, and to a greater or larger extent sometimes than others, is a representative of God to people. And so they are trusted as a result of that. And consequently, when a pastor perpetrates sexual abuse, when a pastor molests someone, it has a way of creating and shaking the very foundations of people's faith in the goodness of God. And so I think that's one of the reasons for that.
So, Pastor Tim, you actually like to differentiate between sexual abuse and sexual misconduct. Why is that?
When we use the term sexual abuse, we are referring to abuse of a minor. And abuse of a minor is a crime. The term sexual misconduct we use to refer to adults or someone over 18 years of age, where the whole question of the consensuality of the incident perhaps comes into play. And so that's an important distinction, because sexual abuse of a minor is a crime in all 50 states and all 10 provinces. And so that's a very important distinction. And that's why we make that distinction between sexual abuse and sexual misconduct.
Now, we hear that many victims are hesitant to report the abuse or misconduct. Why do you think that is?
Part of the reason for that, Hal, is there's a deep sense of shame that is present in any kind of sexual abuse that I've ever been involved with. And very often, because in the case of sexual abuse, you have a minor or a child who has been wronged by an adult, there's an imbalance of power there. And in addition to the shame, the child often thinks, no one's going to believe me. If I come out and say that Pastor so-and-so did this, or one of the deacons, or one of the elders, or the Sunday school teacher, or whatever, no one is going to believe me, because that person is viewed as a spiritual giant in this church, in this organization, that type of thing. So the power imbalance, and also the fear of not being able to be believed. When you look at the adult world, for example, since I've been doing this for over 35 years now, I have talked to numerous, usually women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who have lived with their secrets for all these years since they were children. And part of the reason for that is simply because they were so ashamed. They felt that perhaps they had encouraged it in some way. They felt that perhaps they were guilty. All of the blame should have been on them. And then no one would believe me. And so they just kept it to themselves and never told a soul until they shared it with me decades later.
So if a church member is sexually abused or there's some sexual misconduct involved, how should they respond? Should they go right to the police right away or talk to maybe a clergy member first within the church?
We encourage people that when we're talking about a crime or a potential crime, and that would be involving minors, go to the legal authorities immediately. Okay, put it into that realm right away. Now, one of the things that we try to encourage Christian organizations to do is to have an intentional policy regarding abuse of any kind. And I'm always surprised at the number of organizations that don't have that. And our advice to them is, you know what, you're just waiting for trouble. Be proactive rather than reactive, because all you need is one allegation and your entire reputation as an organization, your entire reputation as an individual, as a pastor, as a Christian leader, hangs in the balance. And people read a name in the newspaper, they never forget that. Oh, that church, oh, that guy, that sort of thing. So we encourage people to be proactive and have some kind of a policy so that when, God forbid, something does happen, there is a strategy in place, an operation in place that takes away from the immediate emotions of the whole thing. And so we're always surprised, however, at the number of Christian institutions that want to handle it within, want to handle it ourselves. And much as we can appreciate that, Hal, it's not wise for a number of reasons. Okay, I'll just use one example here. For example, I think most of us are aware of the unfortunate circumstances at Willow Creek Church in suburban Chicago. Thankfully, that, if I can use that word, it didn't involve minors, it was adults. But when the allegations came to light, the allegations were brought forward and the church board was instructed, go to an outside third-party independent investigator.
So let me ask you something. How should a church deal then with clergy members who are repentant, maybe involved with sexual misconduct involving two adults? Some churches have reinstated people in other cities, and there is such a thing as forgiveness. What do you think?
Yes. An organization, a church denomination that I was a part of for 15 years of my ministry, I sat on a committee that they called the Discipline Review Committee. Anytime there was an allegation, that came to the committee. And again, we had a standard of procedure for how we went about. It would always include an interview with all of the parties, an opportunity given for the accused to present their case, and they were always invited to bring an advocate, someone in their corner, so that they didn't feel like they were up against 5 or 6 people that didn't believe a word they were about to say. However, when it involved children and the police were involved or it had already gone to court, we would not deal with the situation until after the legal authorities had finished their process. And so I certainly believe in second chances. You know, the essence of our Christian theology is that God is a God of second, third chances. There's all kinds of examples in Scripture where that was the case. And so absolutely, we believe in that, and we would like to give everyone a second chance. However, that does not take away from the importance of a thorough investigation as soon as allegations are brought forward.
So what can the church do to better build a system of accountability?
As I mentioned before, I think the first thing they need to do is to have some kind of a policy in place, a protocol in place, something that is crafted and designed not in the environment of a scandal, something that is put together long before any incident has taken place so that it's more objective. There's just a lot of value in having a policy on the books that you can go to immediately. If you don't have such a policy, the job becomes 10 times more difficult for a variety of reasons. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of Christian organizations having a protocol, a standard in place for dealing with allegations. Don't ever say it's not going to happen here. That's the worst thing you can say.
Some wonder, Pastor Tim, if a contributing factor within the Catholic Church is the fact that the priests are required to remain celibate. If priests were potentially allowed to marry, you think that would make a difference?
I think it would help. I don't think it would solve the problem completely. And the reason I say that is because in the Protestant world, often the perpetrator or the accused is married and ostensibly a happily married person. And so marriage alone is not the ultimate solution to it. I think from talking with my Catholic friends and that sort of thing, that it would certainly help address that whole issue of celibacy, but I'm not convinced that in and of itself is the sole solution.
Reverend Tim Callaway, pastor of Daybreak Community Church in Airdrie, Alberta, thanks a lot for your time today.
I appreciate it, Hal. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.